Tonight, in medieval Europe, in the shadowed walls of a castle keep, a quiet, torch-lit garderobe rests by the cold stone. The night air hums faintly through its narrow chute, carrying whispers from centuries ago. You are safe here. The candle trembles on its base, breathing warmth into the damp air. A small question drifts in like lamplight. What did the castle servants and night soil men know that we forgot? Perhaps it's how a city learned to live with its own waste, or how dignity found its shape even in silence. Down stone corridors and along frozen bridges, they carried secrets unseen, yet essential, keeping comfort alive beneath layers of shame. A wooden seat above a dark shaft was once a throne of necessity, where kings and peasants shared a truth no court ever spoke aloud. Listen to the drip of time along those walls, to the wind through the hollow flue, to the sound of patience. Each room held a story of survival, invention, and quiet understanding of the body's truth. If you are tired, let this memory breathe for you. If you are awake, follow its calm descent through centuries of stone and shadow. Tonight, we will follow softly, and we will leave only quiet behind. Hey friends, tonight we'll walk right through the heart of the dark history behind medieval toilets. More than just a lavatory. The rain falls slowly along the castle walls. Cobblestones glisten under the flicker of torches. A faint bell marks the hour from the chapel tower. Somewhere, bread cools beside a hearth, and water sighs in a clay basin. The corridors smell of smoke and lie. The rushes on the floor hold the day's footsteps. A servant passes with a bucket, head bowed, and cloak damp from the evening chill. The torch in his hand leaves ripples of gold across the walls, lighting the path to places no one speaks of. A wooden door creaks open. Cold air rises like memory. It is here, behind the stone, that history's quietest stories begin. Before we begin, please like and subscribe. Only if this truly helps you unwind. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now lie back and get comfortable. Let's begin tonight's story. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to our tale of the dark history behind medieval toilets, more than just a lavatory. Chapter 1. Beneath the stone seat. It began, not with disgust, but with necessity. In a world of stone and timber, of hearth smoke and candle soot, the body's simplest need became an act of quiet ingenuity. Long before the word toilet existed, there were garderobes, narrow chambers built into castle walls, perched high above the ground, or water. From them, a shaft dropped straight down, carrying away what no one wished to see again. Yet every brick and board told a story of how people once lived, adapted, and endured. In the 12th century, castles were both fortress and home. Each was designed to keep out enemies, but rarely to keep in warmth or comfort. So, architects found a way to add small projecting rooms, called garderobes, with wooden seats over chutes that emptied into moats or cesspits. The idea was simple: let gravity do the work. But in that simplicity lay 1,000 complications. Imagine the chill of dawn in winter. A nobleman, still wrapped in his nightrobe, crosses the corridor, torchlight trembling. He pushes open a small door. The cold rushes in from the shaft. Beneath him, darkness breathes. Deep and still, he sits for a moment, not as a lord, but as a man vulnerable, human, alone with the sound of dripping water far below. This was the humbling truth of the Middle Ages. No matter one's crown or coin, Every person met the same silence here. The word garderobe itself meant to guard one's robes. Many believed that the sharp ammonia rising from waste kept moths and vermin away from clothes, so nobles sometimes hung their garments nearby. A strange duality, filth as protection, odor as shield. What today would seem unthinkable once carried quiet practicality. Servants, known as gong farmers or night soil men, worked by lantern and rope to clean the pits beneath. Their task was perilous. The air below was thick, the gases deadly. Some suffocated in silence, found by dawn with their tools still in hand. Yet they were essential, the unseen stewards of health and habit. Without them, sickness would have spread even faster through the close, crowded quarters of medieval towns. In London, York, and Paris, waste was often dumped into open ditches or the river. The Thames was both lifeline and sewer, its surface shimmering with torchlight and things best left unnamed. Still, people adapted. City ordinances were written to fine anyone who emptied chamber pots into the street during the day. By night, though, the rules softened. Windows opened quietly. The sound of pouring water was a common lullaby. And so, life continued. But castles held secrets of their own. The privy towers, built high on outer walls, were sometimes connected to hidden tunnels. In times of siege, the same chute that carried waste might be used by spies or infiltrators. A few chroniclers tell of soldiers slipping through these narrow shafts to enter or escape unseen. The garderobe became a place where survival met strategy, where necessity met chance. Even the architecture spoke. Some chutes opened above the moat, others over sheer cliff faces, letting wind and rain cleanse the stone. In grander halls, the seats were carved with care, polished smooth, sometimes lined with cloth. A candle was placed nearby to keep out foul air, its flame both comfort and warning. Too near the edge, and the wax might melt into danger. Still, there was a kind of intimacy here, a reminder of the body's truth amid the pomp of feasts and banners. It was where a person laid aside armor, title, and pride. In that stillness, the grand and the humble became equal. And then there was the smell, unavoidable and constant. It lingered in corridors and behind thick tapestries. Perfumed herbs were scattered on rush floors, and lavender or mint was burned in bowls to mask the scent. Yet even the best disguises faded. The Middle Ages were not a clean time, but they were a clever one. People found beauty in survival, dignity in routine, and balance in imperfection. The lower servants, those who cleaned and carried, knew this truth most deeply. They spoke little of it, yet their work kept life moving quietly. At dawn, they would tip ash or straw into the shafts to keep the air drier. At dusk, they would light incense or herbs to keep away illness. There was no shame in this only purpose. As centuries passed, the garderobe evolved. Monasteries added drainage channels. Manor houses built double seats for families or attendants. In some places, shared latrines became social spaces, where conversation hummed softly through the chill. Laughter echoed off the stone, blending with the sound of running water. And beneath it all, disease waited. The Black Death taught Europe how deeply life and waste were entwined. From those dark years, sanitation slowly grew into a science. The lesson was clear. Cleanliness was not a luxury, it was survival. Yet tonight, as we wander through these corridors of history, there's no need for disgust or laughter, only quiet understanding. Every candle, every stone shoot, every careful broomstroke carried human hope, the wish to make life gentler, to manage what could not be avoided. So when you picture the Middle Ages, don't only see the throne rooms and tapestries. See the torchlight on the wall, the quiet servant at dawn, the air that carried both life and decay. See the ingenuity, the humility, the unspoken truth that all humanity shares. The past not only lives in its beauty, it breathes in its necessity. And so, in the hush of the garderobe, history sits beside you, real, human, and strangely tender. Chapter 2: The Servant's Secret Work. In the still hours before dawn, when even the hounds slept and the torches had burned low, a quiet rhythm stirred beneath the castle. The servants began their unseen labor. Soft steps over straw, muffled buckets, the sigh of worn rope through cold hands. No trumpets called them, no bell marked their hour. It was work done in silence, for a world that preferred not to know. Among them were the gong farmers, the night soil men, and the scullions who followed them, those whose lives circled the lowest task, yet upon whom all comfort rested. They knew the castle's secrets better than its lords. They knew where the shafts bent, where the air turned foul, where stones sweated in the dark. Their faces bore the same patience as the walls themselves. In a corner of the courtyard, near the kitchens, stood a small wooden shed with a low door. Inside were shovels, ropes, tar-stained barrels, and a few simple masks of oiled cloth. This was the gong farmer's refuge. Each night he descended into the pits, his lantern swinging slowly beside him, the smell thick and warm, like a living thing. He worked by the flame's small mercy, scraping, lifting, clearing what the castle above wished forgotten. They were paid well, for few dared the task. The dangers were many: suffocation from trapped gas, infection from cuts, and the sudden slide of earth beneath one's boots. And yet they went willingly, for even this shadowed labor fed their families. When dawn broke, they climbed up again, eyes watering from the cold air, faces marked with ash and resolve. Sometimes, if you stood quietly in a castle corridor, you could hear the soft scrape of their tools deep below. It was a sound of devotion, unthanked yet constant, a heartbeat under stone. They were invisible, architects of health, the keepers of unseen order. In towns, their cousins walked the night streets with carts, collecting from homes what had no other path. The work was steady, the pay was enough to live, though no neighbor wished them close. Their houses stood at the edge of fields, near the wind's mercy. Children knew to keep a polite distance, but also a quiet respect. Without them, the sicknesses that haunted the Middle Ages, dysentery, cholera, and plague, would have found faster roads. The church spoke of cleanliness as next to godliness, but it was these hands that practiced it daily, without sermon or song. Their faith was practical. They believed in soap when they could find it, in lime for its bite, in ash for its cleansing. Some sang softly as they worked, psalms and low hums to fill the void. The rhythm of scraping became their hymn. At times, nobles mocked them, yet depended entirely on their endurance. The same lord who held court by day, perfumed and precise, would owe his comfort to a man who worked by night in filth. It was the quiet contract of survival class, and humility bound by necessity. And so, beneath every castle banquet, beneath every velvet chamber, the unseen hands of sanitation turned. When a garderobe overflowed, it was they who dug new channels, patched walls, or poured lye and ash to calm the stench. Their knowledge was wordless, but vast, an instinct for where gases gathered, how stone should breathe, how waste should flow. Centuries later, their unrecorded craft would form the foundations of modern sanitation. But in their own time, it was nothing more than another night's work. In the stillness of early morning, they would return to the surface, wash their hands in cold water, and stand in the courtyard as the first light touched the towers. The air smelled different up here, sharp, thin, alive. Some would close their eyes for a moment, feeling the wind on their face. Then, quietly, they would vanish back into the castle's rhythm, unseen once more. There were rules unspoken among them. Never leave a lantern unattended, for the air itself could burn. Never whistle in the pit, the old belief said. It woke restless spirits. Never speak a man's name down there, for the dead might hear it. Whether superstition or safety, these rituals gave their nights a fragile order. They carried amulets of brass or bone, sometimes a simple charm blessed by a priest. Protection, perhaps, or courage. In the winter months, the ground froze, and the work grew harder. Buckets cracked, ropes stiffened. Frost gathered on the stone edges, glimmering faintly by lamplight. Yet even then, they worked, for if they stopped, the castle above would soon smell its neglect. Sometimes, the younger boys would joke that they were the castle's lungs, clearing what the nobles breathed out. Others laughed, but the truth was near enough. Without their labor, the fine air of courtly life would grow heavy, and disease would creep from a cellar to throne. The night soil men of London faced the same struggle. In the narrow lanes of southward, under moonlight, they would wheel carts down the alleyways, calling softly before they began. Their tools clanked faintly against the cobblestones, and the city's hidden pulse moved with them. When dawn came, they left the city walls, dumping their loads in distant fields, where farmers turned waste into soil. It was an ancient cycle of filth into earth, earth into food, food into life. And so, the chain of necessity continued, unseen yet sacred. By day, those same streets would fill with merchants, bakers, and children playing, unaware of what had been cleansed in the night. The world above slept peacefully, because others worked in silence below. In castle ledgers, their wages were small entries. For the clearing of the privy, 1 shilling. No name, no thanks. Yet their endurance carved the quiet path toward civilization's comfort. Every palace had its pride. Every fortress had its secret shame, and between them stood these nameless workers, turning necessity into mercy. Their story seldom reached the songs of minstrels or the pages of chronicles, but if you listen, even now, to the slow wind through castle ruins, you can almost hear them. The scrape, the lift, the steady breath. It is the sound of labor, too humble to be remembered, yet too vital to be forgotten. And when their shift ended, they washed as best they could, found bread, and rested. The world they kept clean never paused to honor them, but they needed no applause. They knew something deeper, that survival itself was their legacy. Their humility became history's foundation stone. So tonight, as we wander softly through the corridors of time, remember them, not with pity, but with quiet respect, the servants of shadow who made the light possible. the keepers of the castles breathe, the unseen hands that turn burden into balance and filth into life. And so, the night continues, gentle, persistent, honest. Every story of comfort has its opposite, every moment of elegance its quiet cost. The gong farmers knew this better than anyone, and perhaps that is what they knew that we forgot. Chapter 3: The Castle and the City. Waste, water, and wisdom. Morning drifts across the towers like pale smoke. The bells of the chapel toll once, their sound rolling through the valley, touching the rooftops of the city below. Inside the castle, servants stir embers back to life. A thin column of warmth rises through the chill corridors. The scent of bread, faint and new, mingles with damp stone and the ghost of night's labor. Above, the court will soon wake. Below, the world of drains and channels hums to life. Long before anyone spoke of plumbing, the people of these fortresses understood that water was memory. It carried everything: cleanliness, disease, rumor, and hope. Each drop that slid down a channel told the story of a day: the washing of hands, the rinsing of wounds, the cooling of ale barrels, the humble scrubbing of floors. Every castle was, in its own way, a living machine. Beneath banners and torches, it breathed through pipes of stone and timber, through gutters carved into the very heart of its walls. The castle mason, gray-bearded and patient, had long learned that waste and water were siblings. To move one was to understand the other. So he shaped the walls to carry both. The same rain that danced on the battlements was guided carefully through channels to fill cisterns, wash kitchens, and finally feed the hidden chutes that carried away what must not remain. In summer, when rain was scarce, wells were prized beyond gold. In winter, when snow sealed the paths, the garderobes froze, and the castle learned humility once more. In towns beyond the moat, life was tighter. Streets narrowed, houses leaned toward one another, as though whispering secrets. Beneath the cobbles ran drains, some planned, many accidental, where rain and filth shared the same uncertain road. Waste met water, and water met mouth again. It was a dangerous circle, yet it endured for centuries. The people believed that flowing water, however foul, was still holy, that the river's current absolved the sins of what it carried. At dawn, women fetched water from wells, their buckets swinging in rhythm with soft chatter. Children followed, chasing the echo of their laughter along the lanes. A baker opened his shutters. Steam poured out to meet the mist. The smell of yeast and soot wove through the air, and in the gutters, the city's quieter work began the slow trickle of what the night had left behind. It was not filth to them. It was the rhythm of living, the same as breath or hunger. Within the castle, engineers without title tended to the cisterns. They listened to drips, studied the sound of flow through pipe and stone. If the pitch changed, they knew a crack had formed somewhere deep inside. To mend it, they crept into crawl spaces, barely wide enough to breathe. There, with wax, clay, and patience, they sealed the past for another season. Few saw them, fewer thanked them, yet without their craft, the castle would drown in its own silence. The city builders learned from the castles. They built bridges with holes for runoff, gutters that met drains, and drains that met streams. Every new wall was a negotiation with gravity. The people began to see water not only as a gift, but as a mirror showing what they were willing to hide. A clean fountain was pride, a fouled one was shame. Thus, Cleanliness became a sign of faith as much as comfort. Monks preached it, merchants funded it, and kings declared it holy. And yet, every decree still relied on a servant's tired hands and a bucket's slow rhythm. When evening came, torches lit the river's edge. Fishermen leaned against the rails, talking softly as their lines shimmered. They knew what floated past them, but they also knew hunger. The river was cruel and kind in equal measure. They prayed not for purity, but for enough. The city's physicians began to wonder at patterns. When the rain ran clear, the people thrived. When it darkened and stilled, fevers followed. They wrote their observations in ledgers that smelled of ink and vinegar. Some spoke of miasma, the bad air that rose from waste, curling invisibly into lungs. They burned herbs, hung bundles of rosemary and lavender above doorways. They did not yet know of germs, but they knew the language of scent and wind. Inside monasteries, monks copied ancient texts about hygiene from the East. They read of Roman baths and Arabic gardens, of aqueducts that still stood after centuries. The old wisdom whispered across time, water must move. The monks built small conduits, washing rooms, and even heated baths. In their silence, they became keepers of forgotten science. Meanwhile, outside their walls, peasants bathed in rivers when seasons allowed, and not at all when frost returned. They rubbed their skin with ash to feel cleaner, believing that grit drew out impurity. Mothers taught daughters to fetch fresh water before dawn, when wells were quiet and the air still kind. And through all of it, the toilet, the garderobe, the pit, the privy remained the humble constant. Each castle had one that overlooked water, its chute blending seamlessly into the moat. When siege came and water ran foul, even kings envied the birds. Soldiers spoke of the smell before the enemy's banner appeared. The nose knew defeat before the eyes did. Yet, out of necessity, the people learned. They built latrines over running streams, moved waste to lower ground, and discovered the worth of lime. Cities began to regulate the cleaning of drains, not from compassion, but from survival. Every written rule was a scar from the last outbreak. The night returns. The torches along the river fade. In the castle, the mason sleeps with one ear open, dreaming of stone that breathes. The servant who empties the basins hums to himself, his tune soft as wind through reeds, and the river keeps moving, forgiving everything it carries. What they built was crude, yet what they understood was profound. Life must flow. If water stops, so does mercy. Far beyond the city, across the dark fields, the waste of one kingdom becomes the soil of another. Farmers spread the night's labor on furrows under the pale moon, knowing that what was cast away feeds what will feed them. A quiet circle, endless, unspoken. And so, within the hum of the medieval night, the boundary between filth and faith blurred. Water washed all things, not by miracle, but by patience. And in that patience, civilization found its first breath of wisdom. As night surrendered to the pale blue of dawn, the castle came quietly alive. Servants moved like shadows along the outer walls, carrying pails, kindling fires, and shaking the chill from their sleeves. A thin line of smoke rose from the kitchen flue, curling into the mist. The courtyard smelled of wet straw, iron, and the faint sweetness of burning oak. In the still air, you could hear the trickle of water through channels, the soft rush beneath the stones. It was the castle's pulse, steady and low. Every drop carried the labor of those who had come before, the masons who carved the drains, the women who scrubbed the floors, The nameless workers who climbed down into the waste to keep the air fit for breathing. Far below the great hall, tunnels wound their way like roots. They led to the moat, and beyond it, to the open world. When storms came, these tunnels filled with the sound of thunder above, water roaring beneath. The castle became a living body then, lungs of stone inhaling and exhaling the sky. In these moments, those who worked within the walls understood something simple yet sacred, that cleanliness was never a gift. It was a choice. 100 hands made it possible. The garderobe, perched high and cold, was not merely a place to sit. It was a threshold between the private and the public, the human and the hidden. Kings had used them, queens too, and in that stillness, they were all the same. Some chroniclers wrote of monarchs who made decisions, their treaties considered, letters drafted, wars decided, while the torch flickered beside them. The body's humility became the soul's mirror. But in the city below, humility had a different shape. There, in the maze of streets, filth was not confined to walls. The gutters told stories of trade and hunger, of life lived too close together. Every market left its mark: fish scales, fruit peel, straw, and the remains of a feast scattered underfoot. When the rain came, it washed all of it downhill, toward the river that never stopped forgiving. In the summer heat, though, forgiveness grew thin. The air thickened. The scent of the city deepened. The bakers' ovens gave off warmth that clung to the skin. Housewives hung sprigs of mint in doorways to keep away bad air. Children played by the wells, unaware of what drifted beneath the stones they ran upon. And so, unseen, sickness waited. When plague came, it came not as a roar, but as a whisper, a cough in the night, a fever that would not break. The physicians blamed miasma, foul air rising from unclean corners. They burned juniper, rosemary, and vinegar-soaked rags. They believed that perfume was armor, and that the nose could protect the soul. But not all knowledge was lost. In the libraries of Cordoba, Baghdad, and Constantinople, books spoke of aqueducts, filters, and baths. Some fragments reached Europe through trade and conquest. A few monks copied these passages by candlelight, translating foreign wisdom into Latin prayers. They learned that moving water was mercy, that still water was death. So the builders began to listen differently to the sound of the flow. They shaped drains with more care, built sewers with vents for air. They learned to harness gravity, to guide waste away from wells. Slowly, the lessons of the East mingled with the stubborn pride of the West. In London, new ordinances appeared. No waste was to be thrown from windows after sunrise. Cesspits were to be covered, emptied once each season. The laws were written in ink, but enforced by hunger. Those who broke them paid fines or faced shame in the square. Still, by night, windows opened and buckets tilted. The city slept lightly beneath its own habits. Beyond the walls, travelers on the road carried their own customs. In inns, chamber pots were shared among guests, washed only in the morning. Some were emptied into the stables, others behind the kitchen, where ash heaps waited. It was a common rhythm, never questioned. To be human was to endure the smell of living, and yet, in quiet corners, a different kind of wisdom began to bloom. Herbalists noticed that washing wounds with clean water healed faster. Mothers taught daughters to boil water before mixing it with milk. Shepherds built small troughs with running streams for their flocks, seeing fewer deaths that way. None of this was written in law, but it lived in practice, a slow, whispered evolution. Inside monasteries, baths were prepared once a week. The brothers stepped in quietly, their prayers blending with the sound of splashing. They saw no shame in the body's need for cleansing. Rather, they called it renewal. In their gardens, they grew herbs, not only for healing, but for scent to mask the decay that came with the turning of the seasons. And then, there were the aqueducts, remnants of Rome's grand past, still standing in fragments across the land. Some towns used their stones to build new churches, unaware that they were dismantling the veins of a forgotten age. Others studied them, learning from the old design. These were not pipes of metal, but of wisdom lessons carved in stone, waiting patiently to be remembered. The poor washed in rivers, the rich in tubs. Yet even kings could not escape the truth that water obeyed no class, disease spared no crown. The smell of decay entered every hall, every chapel, every alley. It was a democracy of scent, unforgiving, honest. In the silence that followed plague years, cities changed. Wells were deepened, drains widened, bathhouses reopened, now guarded by priests who blessed the water before each use. People began to see purity as both physical and divine. To wash was to pray, to cleanse was to survive. But there was still one place where faith and filth met daily, the castle's privy tower. There, at the edge of the walls, sat the heart of contradiction, stone carved for comfort above the void. The seat itself, often made of polished oak, bore marks from years of use, smooth, worn, almost tender. Beneath it, darkness whispered. Sometimes, on the still nights, a flicker of torchlight revealed faint carvings on the wall, initials, prayers, even jokes left by those who waited there. The human urge to leave a mark did not spare even the most humble of rooms. Above the seat, a narrow slit in the wall looked out over the landscape. From there, one could see the fields and the winding river, silver under the moon. Perhaps that was intentional, a reminder that the body, S-release, was also part of nature, see endless rhythm. As dawn returned, the castle servants began again. The troughs were emptied, the ashes spread, and the channels checked for cracks. Each act was part of the same devotion, to keep decay at bay, to let life move. The wisdom of the age was not written in books, but in habit. It whispered through broom bristles, echoed in dripping water, hummed in the steady swing of a bucket. It was a rhythm of survival, learned through centuries of quiet repetition. And so, the city grew wiser, not by enlightenment, but by endurance. Each outbreak, each foul season, each hard winter left a lesson behind. They built upon them, one layer of patience at a time. What they created was far from perfect, but it worked in its own unhurried way. Waste moved outward, water flowed inward, and between the two, life continued, fragile, persistent, human. And if you stood on the city walls at dusk, you could see it all at once. The glimmer of water, the flicker of lamps, the smoke rising from kitchens, and somewhere in the dark, a servant emptying a basin beneath the stars. The world turned not on glory, but on the quiet tasks no one spoke of. The night deepens again, and the city exhales. Torches flicker in the wind, their flames bending low, as if bowing to the weight of the hour. Somewhere, a gate closes with a long, tired creak. The cobbles glisten faintly under the moonlight, slick with the day's quiet remains. Every street holds its own melody, the soft rush of the river below, the distant knock of a watchman's staff, the sigh of shutters closing one by one. The river never sleeps. It murmurs to itself, carrying away not only the waste of the living, but the memory of all who came before. Its surface shimmers like breath on glass. Children once played at its edge. Now, fishermen stand there in silence, watching the current move like time itself. In its depths lies the city's truest reflection, both pure and stained, both giving and taking. The castle towers stand above it all, unmoving. Yet even within those proud walls, the same rhythm continues. Water rises, waste falls. The circle completes itself over and over, unending as prayer. The servants who tend the channels no longer flinch at the smell. To them, it is simply the scent of life being honest. By day, the castle shows only splendor. Draped tapestries, long banquets, the clink of goblets. But behind those walls, narrow stairways twist toward the unseen corners of existence. There, under every fine hall, lies the work that makes the beauty possible. The drain, the flue, the hidden pit, all bound together in silence. Some nights, a servant might pause on the narrow landing of the garderobe tower, leaning on his broom to look out the slit of the wall. He sees the torches of the town far below, each light a small vow against the dark. He knows that by morning he will clean again, empty, scrub, and carry and rinse until his arms ache. And yet he smiles quietly, because he knows something his masters do not, that all things depend on what is unseen. In a world ruled by appearances, this knowledge is its own form of freedom. He moves through shadow, yet his work holds the light steady. In the city below, people live closer to one another than the earth itself can bear. The air between houses feels heavy with breath. When it rains, water floods through the alleys, carrying straw, food scraps, and ash. When it dries, dust rises, clinging to every wall. The city breathes, then coughs. And still, people laugh, trade, sing, and fall in love between the stones. Waste becomes part of every life. It seeps into the soil, perfumes the air, and finds its way into song. A cobbler hums a tune to drown the smell from the gutter. A mother tells her child to hold their breath as they pass the tannery. A priest, preaching in the square, speaks of purity of spirit, while stepping carefully over the evidence of its absence. Yet there is dignity here, small, stubborn dignity. Women wash their thresholds with buckets of well water, scrubbing until the stone shows pale again. Men gather to repair the drains, not because the law demands it, but because the smell offends their pride. For every neglect, there is also a gesture of care, and above it all, water flows as a silent witness. In monasteries outside the walls, monks rise before dawn. Their first prayer is for cleanliness, their second for light. They walk barefoot into the cold, wash their faces in stone basins, and breathe deeply of the morning. In their hands, water is sacred, not because it is pure, but because it purifies. Inside the scriptorium, one of them copies an ancient text. The ink runs slightly on the page where his breath falls, but the meaning remains. He writes of water as the body's companion, of cleanliness as the soul's reflection. He does not yet know the language of germs or infection, but he understands balance. What leaves must leave, what flows must flow. As centuries move, the same thought takes shape in the minds of builders and thinkers. They begin to design cities, not against waste, but with it. Channels are deepened, moats redirected, public latrines built in stone. The first faint outlines of a sewer system appear beneath the streets of Paris, Florence, and London. Each one is born not from luxury, but from exhaustion. The people are tired of sickness. They learn that where filth lingers, fever follows. So they make way for air movement, for water, for change. The streets still smell of humanity, but now the scent carries a new undertone, intention. Soap becomes common. Wells are covered. Rainwater is collected in barrels. The city learns to listen to itself. But still, the old habits remain. Waste is part of life. It cannot be banished, only managed. The poorest corners of town still bear the burden. There, the night soil men make their rounds. Lanterns swinging low, faces wrapped in cloth. They move quietly, respecting the sleep of others. Their carts creak softly behind them, wheels whispering against cobble. To see them is to glimpse the city's conscience. They are both invisible and essential. Children fear them. Women cross themselves as they pass. Yet without them, no one would survive the season. The air would grow heavy. The wells would poison themselves. So they walk, unthanked, beneath a sky that watches without judgment. Every bucket they lift, every pit they clear, is a small prayer for the living. And when dawn comes, they vanish into alleyways, leaving behind only the faint scent of lime. The city wakes to clean streets, and never wonders why. Inside the castle, the same ritual unfolds on a smaller scale. A servant climbs the narrow stairs to the privy tower with a bucket of ash. He sprinkles it gently into the chute, watching it fall into darkness. The sound it makes is soft, almost musical. He wipes the seat, trims the candle, and closes the door. No one will ever know his name, but his care will keep the air bearable for those who dine and dream above. He pauses a moment at the window slit, looking out toward the horizon. The dawn is pale and wide. The river gleams like a promise. Somewhere, a bell rings. He breathes deeply, then descends, the echo of his steps blending with the heartbeat of the stone. The wisdom of this world was not carved into monuments or written into law. It lived in motion, in the turning of water, the clearing of waste, the unseen labor that kept decay from triumph. Civilization did not rise from glory. It rose from maintenance. And though the centuries would change the tools and the words, that truth would remain. Progress, at its heart, is simply the art of care, made visible. If you listen closely to the quiet of the ruins today, beneath the hum of modern life, you might still hear it. The whisper of water through old channels, the ghostly drip in forgotten towers, the memory of those who worked while others slept. Their wisdom endures, not in marble, but in every clean breath we take. The city may forget their names, but the air remembers their mercy. Evening returns, wrapping the city in its slow gray light. The sky bruises into violet, and the bells call once for prayer. Across the rooftops, smoke curls upward from 100 hearths, each one small reminder of endurance. Beneath that calm surface, the city still murmurs with life. The sound of barrels rolling down alleys, the chatter of markets closing, the soft slosh of buckets being emptied again and again. To walk these streets at dusk is to feel the heartbeat of 1,000 routines. The cobbles are wet from rinsing, their sheen catching what remains of the sun. At every corner, water drains into narrow channels cut by patient hands. Each one is a tiny act of defiance against chaos. Proof that human beings, even surrounded by filth, will always choose order when they can. The castle above mirrors this rhythm. It too breathes, quietly, between stone and silence. Servants move along the inner corridors, carrying lanterns and buckets. They whisper to each other in tones soft enough not to disturb the sleeping lords. A fire crackles faintly in the great hall, its glow flickering against the carved beams. The scent of wax and iron lingers. Far below that grandeur lies another kind of devotion. A man in rough wool bends beside a drain, pressing his palm to the wall to feel for damp. His hand knows the language of moisture, where it hides, how it creeps. With a small iron tool, he clears a blockage, listening to the relieved sigh of water as it moves again. He smiles faintly. That sound means the castle will sleep easily tonight. He does not speak of his work, and no one asks. Yet his labor is what keeps the candles burning and the feasts warm. The higher the tower, the deeper the pit that supports it. Outside the gates, the city's water carriers make their last deliveries before darkness falls. Wooden yokes rest on their shoulders, ropes biting against their palms. The weight of the barrels bends their backs, but they move with practiced grace. At the wells, they wait their turn, dipping buckets into the cool, black depths. The water glimmers faintly, catching stars that haven't yet appeared in the sky. For a moment, there is peace, the kind that comes from repetition, from knowing one's place in a world that keeps moving. But the peace is fragile. Every generation faces its own reckoning with the same truth. Water gives life, but waste takes it away. When the great floods come, the drains overflow, spilling their secrets back into the streets. The air turns sharp with decay, and the people retreat indoors, burning herbs to cleanse the smell. Disease moves silently then, as it always has, walking the same paths as water once did. Each time the city suffers, it learns. The builders adapt, the rulers decree, the poor endure. Cesspits are lined with stone instead of earth. Drains are widened, public baths open in new quarters. Slowly, the idea of shared hygiene takes root, not luxury, but necessity. And always, the river waits. It listens to their failures and carries them away. In the stillness between seasons, the castle's masons inspect the walls. They find cracks in the garderobe shafts, places where rain has seeped through, freezing and thawing with the years. They patch each wound carefully, smoothing new mortar into old stone. The scent of lime fills the air, clean and bright. It stings their eyes, but clears their thoughts. Repair is a kind of prayer too. Sometimes they speak softly while they work. The walls breathe, one says. The others nod. They know it's true, that air, water, and waste all pass through the same hidden veins. The castle is alive in ways few understand. When night falls, the world above quiets again. The nobles dine, the minstrels play, the candles burn low. Beneath their feet, the unseen continues the drip of moisture, the hum of flow, the soft movement of all that must leave. And in that unseen world lives the true wisdom of the Middle Ages, not in the crowns or the cathedrals, but in the patience of those who tended what no one wished to see. For centuries, history has celebrated the builders of towers and the wielders of swords. Yet without the ones who cleaned, drained, scrubbed, and hauled, no tower would stand long. No throne would stay polished. Civilization depends less on triumph than on maintenance. When the chroniclers wrote their stories, they left out the smell, the sound, the slow rhythm of the servants' nights. But if you close your eyes, you can find them still in the rustle of straw, in the scrape of a bucket, in the faint echo of footsteps through a narrow stone hall. Their ghosts are quiet, but enduring. Down in the town, The river runs dark now. Lanterns reflect on their surface, trembling slightly, as if uncertain. A fisherman stands near the bridge, pulling in his empty net. He sighs and mutters a prayer to the water, not for fish, but for forgiveness, for the way people treat what sustains them. The river, indifferent, keeps moving. Somewhere, a monk writes by candlelight. His quill scratches gently, and the wax drips like seconds passing. He is copying a treatise on water and purity, a translation from a language older than his own. He writes, "To cleanse the body is to honor the Creator, for decay is not evil, only neglect." He pauses, sets down his quill, and smiles. Outside, rain begins to fall. He listens to it striking the roof, a soft applause from heaven. That same rain will run down the gutters of the castle by morning, carrying ash, straw, and memory. It will find its way into the moat, then the river, then the sea, the great circle of necessity, complete once more. The people of the Middle Ages did not think of plumbing as we do today. They thought of it as nature itself, a rhythm that could not be escaped, only respected. Water was both servant and judge. It revealed what one valued and punished what one ignored. In the poorest huts and the richest halls alike, waste was the same reminder that to live is to leave something behind, and to care for what you leave is an act of love for those who remain. That is the heart of their forgotten wisdom, that humility and hygiene are not opposites, but companions. The body is a guest, and cleanliness is its courtesy to the world. And so, the centuries turned. The systems grew more intricate. Wooden pipes became lead ones. Wells became fountains. Pits became sewers. What began as survival slowly transformed into science. Yet the soul of it, that quiet, patient work, never changed. It was still one person, somewhere, lifting a bucket in the dark, keeping the flow alive. If you stand today in the ruins of an old castle, look for the narrow stone projection jutting from its wall. It may seem ordinary, just a forgotten corner open to the air, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear it breathe. That was the garderobe, the threshold between need and invention, between humility and genius. Beneath your feet lies the wisdom of ages, the story of how people learned to live with what they could not escape. The torchlight fades, the castle sleeps, the river hums beneath the stars, and the world, cleansed again for one more night, turns quietly toward tomorrow. Chapter 4. The Long Descent Toward Cleanliness. The century turns, and with it, the sound of water changes. It runs through new channels now, deeper and more deliberate, guided not by chance, but by intent. The old castles, their towers worn and their stones pitted by wind, stand like fossils of a different kind of wisdom, one built from necessity, not design. Beneath their quiet foundations, the same dark shafts remain, breathing faintly, relics of a time when cleanliness was courage. In the towns, though, a new pulse begins to stir. Streets are broader, markets busier, and bridges crowded with carts and horses. The smell is still there, earthy, human, alive, but the people have learned to shape it, to hide it beneath the soft perfume of industry. Soap makers boil their cauldrons in back alleys, blending tallow and ash. Public bathhouses reopen, promising purity for a coin. The echo of buckets striking stone becomes the hymn of the age. Yet for all the progress, the lessons of the old garderobes still linger. Beneath every invention lies the same truth. What we cast away defines us as much as what we keep. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the line between rich and poor deepened, but filth knew no master. Kings washed in gilded tubs, peasants bathed in rivers, and still the sickness found them both. In every town, in every year of drought or flood, waste returned like a memory that refused to fade. At dawn, a street sweeper bends to his work. His broom whispers against the cobblestones, scattering dust into the sunlight. His breath clouds the air, mingling with the faint steam that rises from the city's hidden drains. He hums as he works, not for joy, but for rhythm. It keeps him steady. His broom traces the same path every day, past the tannery, the fish market, the baker's door. By the time the sun reaches its height, the street looks almost clean. Almost. A woman watches from her window. She holds a basin filled with water, warmed by the morning fire. In it float a few sprigs of rosemary, her small rebellion against the air's heaviness. She dips a cloth, wrings it gently, wipes the sill. Below her, a child runs barefoot through the puddles. He laughs. The city moves on. Water is still fetched by hand. Every drop carried from well to home is a small act of devotion. When rain comes, barrels are placed beneath the eaves, their wooden rims darkening as they fill. The people have learned to keep what falls from the sky, as if saving the memory of mercy. And yet, the streets are never still. Waste continues its endless pilgrimage toward the river, drawn by gravity and habit. At night, when the candles gutter and the wind cools the stones, shutters open quietly. A whisper of pouring breaks the silence, then another, then a third. The city breathes out. To modern eyes, it might seem crude, but to them, it was a balance of an unspoken rhythm that joined the body with the world. The people knew what their walls could bear, what their rivers could carry, and how long the air would forgive them. In the castle, this same rhythm wears finer clothes, but keeps the same heartbeat. Servants still rise before dawn, cleaning the privy towers and checking the water channels. But now, there are new devices, lead pipes brought from the cities, wooden valves that creak but hold. The sound of running water is no longer only for moats. It now hums faintly within walls. The nobles marvel at it, call it luxury. The servants know better. It is just another form of work. One such servant, a young man named Alaric, spends his days between buckets and torches. His hands are rough from lime. His clothes smell faintly of smoke and soap. But his mind is sharp. He watches how water moves, how the channels twist, and the pressure changes with each turn. At night, when the castle sleeps, he sketches crude diagrams in charcoal on scraps of parchment, drawings of pipes, sluices, and pumps. No one will ever see them, but in his quiet labor lives the seed of modern plumbing. He dreams of water flowing upward, of waste carried far from where people live. He imagines a world where the air smells of nothing but rain. In the city below, the same dream begins to take shape in the minds of merchants and scholars. In Florence, engineers built conduits to bring mountain water to fountains in the square. In Paris, wooden pipes stretch from springs beyond the walls to feed the homes of the wealthy. And in London, a new profession emerges, the plumber from plumbum, meaning lead. The word spreads like a secret prayer. To plumb is to guide what moves unseen, to shape flow without stopping it. The plumber is not a craftsman alone. He is a quiet priest of balance. But progress is never without cost. The lead that carries the water also poisons it. The The sickness that follows has no visible enemy, only weary faces and slow deaths. No one yet understands why. The physicians call it bad air again. They burn incense and preach patience. The pattern repeats. Still, humanity persists in washing, draining, building, and believing. The river, as ever, receives all. In the monasteries, the brothers record their work. Cleanliness is the way of the soul, one writes, for when the body is purified, the mind grows clear, and the heart grows kind. They do not write these words for fame. They write them for memory. They know that the smallest acts of care, a swept floor, a scrubbed basin, a washed hand, are the foundations of peace. Outside their walls, peasants dig new ditches, deeper and straighter. They learn that a channel dug with care will save a field from ruin. Farmers pour waste upon the soil, watching their crops grow strong. What was once unclean becomes fertile again. The cycle closes, quiet and perfect. It is easy to forget, now, how hard-won this wisdom was. Each insight was born from hunger, each habit carved by plague. The people of the Middle Ages did not have science as we know it, but they had something deeper, patience. They watched the world and listened to its whispers. They did not always understand, but they remembered. And so, beneath the shadow of castles and cathedrals, the true cathedral of civilization took shape, one built not of stone, but of water and will. If you stood there in that time and listened, really listened, you would hear the sound of progress, not in trumpets or bells, but in dripping, in the quiet, steady drip that means a blockage has cleared, that air can move again, that life, in all its humble forms, continues. That sound, faint and patient, is the music of endurance. And so, as the centuries drift forward, the old garderobes grow dusty and forgotten. Ivy creeps up their stone walls, and birds nest in their hollow shoots. The castles no longer need them, for new systems have taken their place. But the old ones remain, silent and steadfast, holding the memory of the first hands that built them, hands that worked without glory, that cleaned so others could dream. Their legacy is not beauty, but balance, and in that balance lies everything that lasts. The centuries roll like water, soft and unstoppable. The world changes shape, but the sound of dripping remains the same. Castles fade into memory, their stone walls softened by moss and time. The cities grow taller, their streets winding like veins through the earth. The hum of life deepens, filled now with the creak of carts, the hammering of smiths, and the voices of merchants haggling beneath banners of linen. Yet beneath it all, in tunnels and channels no one wishes to see, the same quiet work continues. The people have not forgotten what the past taught them. They still know that movement means mercy, that standing water is death disguised as stillness. In places like Venice, the whole city floats upon its own invention. Wooden piles, driven deep into mud, hold streets above water, and under every home, waste finds its patient path to the lagoon. The air smells of salt, tar, and faint decay. But to those who live there, it is the perfume of survival. Elsewhere, the evolution of waste becomes an art. In London, brick-lined sewers begin to replace open ditches. They are narrow, dark, and low, but they promise a new kind of peace, a city that smells less like its hunger. Builders work by candlelight in the tunnels, their sweat mixing with soot and clay. Each brick laid is a breath of hope, a promise that the future will be cleaner than the past. Above ground, people notice the change. The air feels lighter, windows open wider, yet they seldom think of the hands that made it so. They live in comfort, borrowed from the labor of others. Still, progress is not perfection. For every drain that clears, another clogs. For every clean street, a poorer one festers. The balance between wealth and waste stretches thinner each year. The poor still live near the edges of rivers, where the water runs slowly and darkly. They wash where they must, drink where they can. Children grow up learning which puddles are safe and which carry sickness. Their teachers are their mothers, their lessons carved in instinct. In the grand halls of cities, philosophers speak of purity as virtue. They write that the body must be clean for the soul to shine. But outside, in the alleys, purity is a dream too expensive to keep. The bucket and the broom remain the true philosophers of survival. There is a strange beauty in that endurance. The people of these growing towns do not curse their work. They have learned that decay is not punishment, but part of the same dance as growth. Every morning, they scrub away yesterday's dust and begin again. They live within the circle, not above it. At the edge of Paris, new bathhouses rise, not grand, but generous. The water is drawn from wells deep enough to escape the filth of the streets. Men and women wash side by side, quietly, without shame. The air hums with the sound of dripping and laughter. For a few coins, one can wash away the burden of the day. Some say the water feels holy. Others say it feels like home. Both are right. In monasteries across Europe, cleanliness has become a ritual. Monks scrub floors until they gleam, wash their hands before prayer, rinse their mouths before speaking God's name. To them, hygiene is devotion, an outward act of inward grace. They understand that dirt gathers where care is absent, and so they labor with calm joy. But the rest of the world still lags behind. In crowded cities, cesspits overflow, wells turn sour. Disease comes again, not as fire, but as fog, slow, creeping, invisible. The people cough, the doctors pray, and the pattern repeats. For all the wisdom learned, the simplest truth still waits to be accepted. Waste must go somewhere. And so, the thinkers of the age begin to listen, not just to their faith, but to the earth. Engineers study the flow of rivers. Physicians observe how sickness follows filth. Architects sketch cities with cleaner hearts. Among them are dreamers, men and women, who imagine pipes beneath every home, water flowing by its own force, streets washed clean by rain guided to the sea. They call it sanitas, from the Latin word for health. It is the dream of civilization made practical, not grand cathedrals, but drains that breathe, fountains that heal, and homes that do not stink of their own survival. In small ways, the dream begins to take root. Copper pipes replace lead. Wells are covered. Cisterns built higher to catch clean rain. Soap becomes a daily tool, not a luxury. The smell of tallow gives way to lavender and lye. Still, change moves slowly, like water finding its way through stone. Every improvement requires patience, and every mistake costs lives. But even patience leaves traces. In time, the streets grow cleaner, the wells clearer, the air softer. People begin to speak of comfort as if it has always existed. Yet the memory of the old ways lingers in every quiet corner, in the ruins of garderobes, now filled with ivy, in the faint ammonia scent that still clings to castle walls, in the silence of those who once cleaned what no one else would. Their work is buried, but not lost. It lives in every clear drop of water, every unremarkable flush of waste into the unseen. The story of civilization is not written in wars or kings, but in drains. The first sign of progress is not gold, but clean water. The truest mark of wisdom is not wealth, but the absence of smell. Even now, in that time, people feel it, the subtle shift. The cities breathe easier. Markets smell more of bread than rot. Windows open, not for necessity, but for joy. Life, though still hard, feels lighter. On a quiet night, a washerwoman kneels by a public fountain. She dips her rag into the cool basin and watches ripples move outward, catching the light of a single lantern. She smiles faintly, whispering a prayer she does not name. Around her, the city hums not loud, not proud, but alive in its own rhythm. It is easy to miss such moments, but they are the true turning points of history. Not battles, not crowns, but basins filled with clean water, and hands learning to use it kindly. The next age will bring inventions that dazzle iron pumps, underground sewers, running taps, but none of it will matter without this quiet faith that cleanliness is care, and care is civilization. The water flows on. It remembers everything: the castles, the drains, the men who climbed into the dark. It remembers every whisper, every prayer, every hand that carried a bucket through the cold, and as it moves through the veins of a changing world, it carries their wisdom with it, clear, forgiving, endless. Dawn slides through the fog like a pale hand brushing dust from memory. The city, older now, stretches and sighs. Its walls rise higher, its streets grow straighter. Yet beneath those cobbles, the old tunnels still breathe the same dark arteries once tended by lantern and rope. What was once a humble necessity has become design. What was once survival has turned into comfort. 100 years have passed since the first brick sewers of London were laid. In that time, cities have multiplied, and so have their voices. The hum of workshops, the ring of bells, and the shuffle of shoes all mingle with the hidden rhythm of water below. The people no longer think of waste as they once did. It is gone now, vanished into the unseen. A lever pulled, a door closed, a sigh of relief. Civilization begins to forget the humility that built it. But the water remembers. In the quieter districts, public fountains bloom like blessings. Children splash their hands, merchants fill their jugs, and old women wash fruit beneath the cool stream. The marble shines where fingers have worn it smooth. Each drop sparkles with the weight of history. Centuries of learning, failure, and persistence distilled into this one small mercy: clean water, available to all. The bathhouses of the old world have grown into rituals of community. Men and women no longer bathe in rivers or tubs hidden in shadow. Now they enter tiled rooms, filled with steam and echoing laughter. There is warmth here, and light. Soap bubbles catch the lantern glow like glass orbs. The scent of rosewater fills the air. For the first time, cleanliness feels not like labor, but like grace. Still, the echoes of the past hum beneath every stone. The same waste that once fed the fields now flows into pipes that lead far from sight. The people trust those pipes more than they trust the ground beneath them. They no longer think of where their water goes after it leaves their homes. Comfort breeds forgetfulness, and forgetfulness carries its own kind of danger. In the alleys, a man in a leather apron works by lamplight. He is a plumber, though the word now means something finer than it once did. He shapes copper and iron, sealing joints with molten lead. His hands are steady, his eyes sharp. He knows that one mistake, a gap, a crack, a careless seal, can send sickness through an entire street. He works quietly, humming as he goes. When he finishes, he wipes his hands on a cloth that smells faintly of oil and smoke, then looks out his workshop window toward the river. It glows faintly under the moon. He thinks of the men before him, the night soil carriers, the gong farmers, the drain diggers, and feels a small pang of respect. They walked through filth so that he might walk through light. Their ghosts linger in every clean cup he drinks. The city around him grows faster than anyone imagined. Factories rise like cathedrals of iron. Chimneys mark the horizon. And with them comes a new kind of waste. Smoke, soot, ash. The air thickens again, not with the stench of decay, but with progress. The lesson repeats in another form. Every solution births its own burden. Still, within the noise and soot, new dreams form. Engineers speak of underground networks that could carry both water and waste safely away. Architects imagine houses with running taps and drains in every room. They sketch diagrams by candlelight, their fingers stained with ink and hope. In Paris, London, and Vienna, new projects rise massive stone tunnels, arched like cathedrals beneath the earth. Men dig day and night by torchlight, their picks striking sparks from the rock. The air is damp, the work dangerous, but they sing as they labor. They know they are building something that will outlast them, a miracle of motion, unseen yet vital. Above ground, no one notices the songs of the diggers. They only see what results. Streets that smell of bread instead of waste, wells that run clear, fountains that never falter. The city, once a living organism of filth and faith, becomes something else, a machine that breathes order. The first flush toilets appear, strange and marvelous. To the wealthy, they are curiosities. To servants, small blessings. The sound of rushing water, once rare and sacred, becomes part of daily life. Yet even as progress shines, it carries shadows of the past. The pipes, many still made of lead, whisper sickness into the same homes they promised to protect. The cycle continues, elevated, disguised, but not broken. In rural places, the old ways remain. Farmers still dig pits behind their cottages. Children still carry buckets from wells. There is no shame in this, only endurance. The world changes unevenly, as it always has, but the heart of it all, the philosophy of flow, remains constant. The monks once said that stagnant water offends the angels. The engineers of this new age would not use such words, yet their blueprints say the same. Keep it moving. Keep it clean. Keep it unseen. When rain falls, the city glows. Gutters rush like rivers, and the air smells of metal and earth. People stand beneath awnings, listening to the rhythm. It sounds like time itself, washing away the memory of centuries. Somewhere deep below, the old tunnels groan as the stormwater fills them. For a moment, the world above and the world below are one voice, a hymn of water finding its way home. In the midst of it, an old man sits by his window, a cup of tea warming his hands. He remembers his youth, when chamber pots were emptied into the streets, when summer brought the heavy perfume of waste. He smiles faintly at how far the world has come. It smells of rain now, he murmurs, and takes a sip. The taste is clean, bright, ordinary, a miracle so quiet, he barely notices it. The next generation will forget that this simplicity was hard won. They will think clean water has always flowed from the wall, that waste has always vanished at the pull of a lever. But the truth remains buried beneath their feet, in tunnels built by hands they will never know. Civilization, after all, is not built on invention alone, but on memory. Each pipe, each drain, each fountain is a continuation of a promise made long ago, that life, even in its most basic needs, deserves dignity. Night deepens, the lamps burn low, the city sleeps, trusting the unseen machinery of mercy that hums beneath its streets, and the water, ever faithful, keeps moving patient, forgiving, infinite. The rain has stopped. The city glistens, washed and quiet. Lanterns along the bridges tremble in puddled reflections, their light swaying like small, patient stars. Somewhere, the bells toll midnight, slow, deliberate, kind. Above ground, the world sleeps. Beneath it, water still moves, down in the tunnels, deep where air grows cool, and echo answers echo. The great arteries of the modern age hum softly. The men who built them are gone, but their craft endures. Brick after brick, curve after curve, they carved the underworld into order. They tamed what kings could not, the endless, necessary flow of human life. The smell here is not foul now. It is earthy, metallic, honest. A smell that speaks of purpose fulfilled. Streams run dark and steady toward the river, their sound steady as a heartbeat. The city breathes through them, asleep but alive. Above, in narrow streets, once choked with refuse, children dream. Their dreams are of far gentler worlds, of fields after rain, of clean wells and laughter by fountains. They do not know that centuries of labor stand between them and the darkness their ancestors knew. They do not need to know. The gift of civilization is that its miracles become invisible, yet, for those who listen, the past still murmurs. Every raindrop against a window, every sigh from a drain carries faint memory. The creak of wooden buckets, the clatter of iron shovels, the low hum of those who worked unseen, the ghosts of gong farmers, of monks, of plumbers and masons, all still dwell here, woven into the hum of the pipes. In museums now, fragments of garderobes rest behind glass. Visitors pass by with curious smiles. A label reads, "Medieval latrine, circa 13th century." Few pause, long enough to imagine the cold air that once rose through its shaft, the hands that cleaned its edges, the quiet dignity of the work that kept whole households alive. The artifact seems strange, even humorous, until one remembers that it was the foundation of every clean street outside. History's kindness lies in what it allows us to forget. The filth, the fever, the smell all softened by distance. What remains is the lesson, faint but persistent. Cleanliness is not luxury. It is remembrance. Each act of washing, each drop of clear water, is an echo of someone who refused to let decay win. The centuries that followed turned that echo into rhythm. The Industrial Revolution brought machines that pumped, filtered, and purified. Cities learned to listen to the engineers. They dug deeper, built broader, and mapped the unseen. In the late night hours, when the new gas lamps glowed across iron bridges, the sound of progress was not the whistle of trains, but the steady whisper of drains that worked. And so the world grew cleaner, though never fully clean. Disease retreated, but did not vanish. Rivers ran clearer, but still carried memory. The balance endured. In the countryside, farmers continued the old tradition of waste into soil, soil into bread, bread into life. What the cities forgot, The land remembered. The circle closed again, slower now, but unbroken. By the 19th century, the flush toilet had become commonplace among the wealthy. A chain pulled, a valve released. Water carried away what once demanded toil. The sound of rushing water replaced the silence of shame. Yet even this comfort was built upon the same principle as the medieval garderobe: movement, mercy, and humility. The names changed: garderobe, privy, water closet, toilet, but the truth beneath them did not. All were thresholds between self and nature, between what must stay and what must go. And still, in quiet moments, the human connection remained. A servant polishing a brass handle before dawn. A plumber is tightening a joint beneath a floor. A laborer clearing a blockage in a tunnel that no sunlight ever reaches. These are not heroes in songs, but they are the reason songs can be sung in comfort at all. When storms come and the pipes overflow, the illusion of mastery breaks. Streets flood, rivers swell, the old smell rises. Then, for a breath of time, the modern world meets its ancestor, the medieval night of damp stone and dripping water, and we remember that nature is patient. It waits, always. But even that reminder carries no malice. It is simply the river teaching us again what we once knew, that cleanliness is not conquest, but cooperation. We do not defeat filth. We walk beside it, guiding it gently toward its place in the world. As the new century dawns, the first public sanitation boards are formed. Engineers become city priests, drawing maps of underground faith. They trace the veins of the earth with rulers and ink, planning where the water will breathe. They speak of volume, pressure, and flow, but beneath the numbers lies reverence. The servant Alaric's dream, sketched in charcoal centuries before, has finally found form. Water rises by its own power. Waste falls by gravity's grace. The castle's stone chutes have become the veins of an entire civilization. Humanity, after so long, has learned to live with itself. And yet, the truest wisdom of those early days still holds. That dignity begins in the unseen. The state of a people's drains tells the truth of their hearts more clearly than any crown or cathedral. To care for what lies below is to honor what stands above. In a small town by the sea, a child sits at a window, listening to the rain. The sound comforts her. She does not think of where it goes when it runs off the roof, only that it will come again. Her mother lights a candle and tells her to wash before bed. The water in the basin is clear and cool. The child dips her hands, feels the simple miracle of touch, and smiles. Outside, the sea gathers every stream, every drop, every memory, from castle garderobes to city drains, from buckets to pipes. It accepts them all without judgment, and when the tide returns, it brings back only salt and silence. That is the final mercy of water. It forgives everything. And so, across centuries, the story of human waste becomes the story of human wisdom, a slow, humble evolution from darkness to dignity. The castles crumble, the pipes corrode, the rivers change their course. But the understanding endures, that to cleanse is to care, and to care is to live. Tonight, as you listen to the hush between raindrops, remember those who worked in shadow, the ones who built the channels that carried both filth and fear away. Their legacy hums beneath your feet, unseen but eternal. The water still moves, the air still breathes, the world still forgives. Chapter 5. Echoes of the garderobe, memory, myth, and stone. Between crumbling walls and the sheen of modern tile, lies a story that does not end with the last flush. The garderobe's shadow lingers in language, in graves, in the pottery fragments pulled from damp earth, in the jokes carved into oak planks. It lives in quiet ways. A footprint left in clay, a prayer scratched into a latrine's jamb, the way a town still calls a certain corner the old hole. Tonight, we follow those soft traces, listening for how a place of private release became a mirror of social life, ritual, shame, and memory. Archaeologists whisper of surprises found in the most private of places. They do not speak of scandal so much as of insight, from the careful layers of straw, the bits of broken tile, and the charred seeds tucked between stones. They read diets and seasons, trade routes and poverty. A shard of pottery with an imported glaze tells of a merchant who once dined in the hall above. A scatter of fish bones, ground into lime below a garderobe, tells of what sea and river once provided to a town's table. The latrine is a silent ledger of daily life, recording what others wrote in ledgers of coin, what people ate, what they could afford, what crops failed, which seafarers visited in winter. In some ruined monasteries, scholars find more than refuse. They find fragments of prayer beads, pins used to fasten robes, even little tokens tucked into crevices offerings, some think to ward off illness, others a private farewell from a heart heavy with secret grief. There are stories of mothers slipping a charm into a hole for a sick child, of lovers leaving a scrap with a name, of panicked hands hiding a letter where no one would look. In those moments, the garderobe becomes a confessional without a priest, intimacies and small acts of devotion left where only the stone and the night would know. Language has kept a record too, in words that travel quiet routes through time. Garderobe, privy, house of ease, necessary house. Each phrase softens the bluntness of nature with a little politeness. The terms we use are a kind of courtesy. They remind us that even the most basic acts deserve a measure of dignity. In tales and plays, latrines appear as comic relief or as a swift device for secrecy. But the laughter often masks a deeper truth, that cultures always find ways to speak gently about what we all must do. Folklore surrounds these places. Old village tales tell of spirits who haunt the pit, of warnings to children not to linger near the water at night. Some say the river remembers those who were careless and keeps them close. Others say it forgives everything, returning it to sea as if to forget. The rituals vary. Farmers toss certain herbs into pits in spring to bless the soil. Mothers sprinkle a little ash into a newborn's chamber pot as a superstition against fever. Craftsmen leave chalk marks on latrine beams to ward off the eye of envy. These small rites are not merely superstitious. They are the community's way of naming danger, giving shape to what otherwise feels unmanageable. Across time, social status showed itself in the toilet as surely as in the table. In great halls, the conveniences were carved with care. The seats might bear carved arms or soft linen covers. In poor cottages, a simple hole in the ground served the family and the local mice. The physical difference was also social theater. Who could afford privacy? Who required help? Who was designated to clean? In court records and household accounts, payments for cesspit emptying appear alongside payments for coffins and goats. Reminders that this labor was quietly commodified. Those who did the cleaning moved in a space of social ambiguity, essential, yet kept at arm's length by polite society. Then there is humor, the gentle human way of lightening the heaviness of everyday necessity. Minstrels and jesters use the privy for jokes, because laughter makes even shame manageable. Carvings of grotesques and unlikely faces sometimes appear near latrines, perhaps, to startle the passerby into wryness, perhaps to mark the place with the human impulse to caricature. These small marks of mirth soften the stench of the world, turning a practical object into a piece of lived culture. The garderobe's archaeology also reveals technology and adaptation. Where water was scarce, people developed chambers with straw and ash to absorb odors. Where tides were kind, chutes were cut toward rivers, using the tide as a natural flush. Ingenious wooden valves and clay baffles appear in the record, attempts to moderate smell and slow the nuisance of insects. The presence of special stones, limestones for lining pits, coarse sand to tamp moisture, speaks of experiment and folk engineering, trial and patient error, passed down in craft knowledge rather than in scholars' books. And in the most poignant finds, the privies become archives of health. Bone fragments and parasite eggs preserved in peat and lime can tell modern scientists about the burdens of disease that once made even a king weak. From a modest latrine sample, epidemiologists learn about parasites that shifted with trade, about diets that changed with conquest, about the slow rhythm of nutritional stress through centuries. In these small, decayed things, the human story, fragile, resilient, practical, remains legible to those who know how to read it. Museums now display latrine finds with careful labels and attentive lights. But in their cabinets, the objects are more than curiosities. They are testimonies. A child's clay cup found in a cesspit suggests a life that could not be kept from the street. A fragment of a comb suggests someone who cared for appearance amidst hardship. These are not shameful remnants, but proofs of ordinary dignity endured under difficult circumstances. There is also the slow, surprising cultural afterlife. Words and jokes that migrated from privy to parlor. A phrase once used to scold a careless youth may now appear in a proverb about humility. A local custom, adding a sprig of rue to a chamber pot, becomes, centuries later, a charming anecdote told to tourists. The past softens as it enters the present, but it never fully loses its edge. And yet, for all the small wonder, the garderobe teaches a greater patience. Its lessons are not loud. They are not meant to be shouted from rooftops. Instead, they are the steady knowledge that human life requires maintenance, and that such maintenance is an act of community. When a town banded together to dig a new ditch, or when a lord paid a gong farmer a fair wage, they were not merely solving a problem, they were granting dignity. The architecture of sanitation, then, is not only about stone and water, it is about the moral architecture of a people. Tonight, as we consider these traces, rest with the thought that the things we discard often contain what we most need to remember. The gardener of history turns the soil of the past and finds not only waste but tokens of hope, seeds, pins, beads, and the odd little scrap of a life stubborn enough to endure through muck. In those small remains is the proof that people lived fully, loved, feared, and found ways to care for one another under the most ordinary conditions. Listen for the faint scrape of a trowel in some far field, the quiet voice of a digger brushing soil away from a pot rim. They are the slow keepers of memory, and their work changes our view of what is noble. The garderobe, once hidden and hushed, becomes a teacher in time, instructing us in humility, continuity, and the gentle craft of survival. If we learn to read its quiet ledger, we learn more than the habits of the past. We learn how to look after each other in the present. Morning seeps into the ruins, pale and forgiving. Dew gathers on the grass that now covers the outlines of what was once a fortress wall. To a passerby, it is only stone and moss, but beneath that moss lie the veins of old sanitation, the carved chute, the drain, the patient geometry of necessity. When the sun warms the rock, faint scents still rise: lime, clay, the echo of centuries of use. Archaeologists step softly here, trowels glinting in the first light. They map each cavity, sketch each layer of rubble. For them, the garderobe is not a curiosity, but a conversation. Every pit they open tells the same gentle truth, that daily life is never lost, only buried. Between soil and straw, they find the proof that survival once had a smell, a texture, a weight in the hands. Sometimes they uncover fragments of the wooden seats themselves, blackened by time, still shaped by the curve of human comfort. Touching them feels like touching thought, made solid. Someone long ago measured that curve, carved it smooth, wanted a moment of ease in the cold. Even in the humblest tasks, there was care. In castles where whole towers have fallen, the garderobe shafts remain straight as memory. Birds nest in them now. Ivy climbs their inner faces, following the path waste once took downward to the moat. In the rain, they become small waterfalls, the sound mingling with the wind in the grass. Nature has repossessed the mechanism, turning filth into freshness. The cycle closes quietly. In towns, restoration workers often find cesspits beneath modern shops. When they open them, the air sighs out a breath, trapped for 500 years. Inside are layers of story: fish bones from a Friday fast, cherry pits from a summer feast, a coin dropped by accident and lost to darkness until today. There are shoes too, their leather curled like sleeping cats. Every object is intimate, every layer another stanza in the poem of habit. Historians read these pits as social diaries. The richer the waste, the broader the trade. Exotic spices in the residue mean ships once docked nearby. Grains of pepper or cloves reveal networks of commerce stretching across oceans. The garderobe, then, becomes a map of connection, a record of the world's early globalization, written not in ink, but in compost. And in monasteries, where silence ruled, the latrine was the one place sound was allowed. Brothers moved there in lines, robes brushing stone, their sandals whispering across flagstone floors. Some sang softly to drown the echo of water, others prayed. The rule of certain orders required cleansing not just of body, but of intent. Wash before work, wash after rest, wash the tools that serve both hand and spirit. Cleanliness was obedience, a rhythm as steady as the bell. The architecture followed the belief. Channels of running water passed beneath the monastic latrines, not for luxury, but for mercy. Flowing water, they said, carried sin away. Centuries later, when the stones were found, engineers marveled at the precision of their fall, the way gravity and grace were made to cooperate. In villages, customs were plainer, but no less symbolic. Each household scattered herbs, mint, thyme, and pennyroyal near its pit to please both air and angels. During harvest festivals, people threw handfuls of ash into the old ditches as a gesture of renewal. Children learned early to respect those boundaries. The pit was where things went to rest, and rest demanded silence. The language of purity wove itself into sermons and songs. Keep thy house as thy heart, one preacher wrote in the 14th century, lest both become foul. The comparison was simple, but it endured. When later reformers spoke of cleansing corruption, they borrowed the imagery of sanitation, rinsing, draining, purging. The moral vocabulary of cleanliness was born in those medieval pits. Even art could not resist the metaphor. Marginal drawings in illuminated manuscripts sometimes showed tiny figures cleaning or dumping waste from miniature towers, comic, yes, but also honest. The artists knew that holiness coexisted with the human. In the margin of a psalter, a monk doodled a man on a stool, head bowed, as if in prayer. Below him he wrote, "So doth every soul descend to be raised anew." Humor and humility, side by side. When modern excavators uncover these images, they smile at the candor of the past. It was a world that hid its odors, but not its truths. To speak of waste was not to be crude, but to be complete. Life contained everything, and therefore nothing was excluded from the story. Today, tourists walk through castle ruins and peer curiously at small stone alcoves labeled garderobe. Guides explain their purpose with polite laughter. Cameras click, but standing there, one can still feel the draft that moves through the shaft, the cool breath of centuries. The wind hums softly up the chute, as if the past itself were exhaling. A historian once wrote that the garderobe is the most democratic space in medieval architecture. Everyone used it, from king to page. For a few moments, all were equal in need. The stone does not remember titles, only weight and warmth. In that equality lies the quiet beauty of the place. When twilight falls on those ruins, the light turns the stone a deep gold. Shadows stretch across the moss. The old channels glint like veins in a body turning toward sleep. The air smells of rain and lime. In that hush, it is easy to imagine the world as it was, cold, honest, human, and to understand that every act of cleaning, every effort to keep decay at bay, was a form of hope. Hope, after all, is what keeps water moving. The evening rain has passed, leaving the streets of the old town slick and shining. The stones hold the day's warmth, releasing it as a faint mist. Along the riverbank, the outlines of vanished walls can still be seen when the water runs low, lines of masonry half buried in silt. To most, they are simply ruins. To those who know, they are the lower bones of a forgotten system, drains, vaults, shafts, and the hidden arteries of the medieval world. Beneath the tavern, where laughter drifts into the night, an archaeologist's lamp flickers. He kneels beside a trench that cuts through clay the color of smoke. The smell is damp, ancient, oddly sweet. What he brushes free is not treasure, yet it tells a richer story, a layer of dark soil, streaked with straw and ash, the same texture found in every medieval cesspit. He lifts a fragment of glass green, thick, hand-blown. Once it was a bottle, likely used to store rosewater for washing. The thought is gentle. Even in the roughest centuries, people sought fragrance, a little beauty against the heaviness of the world. Close by, he finds a seed, tiny but whole. Under the microscope, it will reveal what the people of this town once ate, how far trade reached, and what the season of plenty or famine looked like. From such remnants, the daily rhythm of the past rises again. The meals, the feasts, the hunger, the relief. A garderobe is not a place of disgust in his eyes. It is a chronicle written in organic ink. Above ground, tourists sip wine and talk of knights and kings. They rarely imagine the hidden infrastructure that made those legends possible. The banquet of history is supported by the plumbing of reality. The same walls that echoed with music also echoed softly with the sound of water falling through stone. There are castles where the garderobes were built side by side, a row of small niches over a shared shaft. Servants would hang cloth between them for modesty, though privacy was relative in a world where life itself was shared. Families ate together, worked together, slept in the same room. Even in relief, they were communal. Only later would solitude become the measure of civility. The presence of water transformed these spaces. In fortresses built on rivers, the chute opened directly to the current. In hilltop keeps, waste dropped into lime-filled pits that had to be cleared by hand. The difference was geographic, but also symbolic. Castles near living water felt blessed by motion, those without learned endurance. To live away from the flow was to live with patience, a virtue the Middle Ages prized. In monastic houses, the word re-redorter named the communal latrine block. It stood at the far end of the dormitory, connected by a long passage, so that even in winter, monks could reach it without stepping into open air. Channels beneath carried the waste away, but also the sound of water, a soft, constant prayer that never ceased. In some ruins, that sound can still be heard after rain, trickling through the old conduits, repeating what centuries of voices once whispered. The modern ear, tuned to engines and wires, forgets that sound. Yet when you stand in those cloisters at dusk, and the air cools enough to still every bird, you can hear it faintly, the thin thread of running water, the same rhythm that steadied human hearts long before machines. Not all garderobes belonged to grandeur. In the lanes of medieval towns, shared pits served clusters of homes. They were social hubs of another kind, places where neighbors met in the awkward light of dawn, exchanged news, and passed buckets. The work was unpleasant, but it kept communities alive. A cesspit was like a clock. When it filled, everyone knew it was time for change. The hiring of the night soilmen became a small festival of relief. Songs were made for it. Jokes traded to disguise the smell. Fragments of those songs survive in dialect and proverb. Clean pit, clear heart, says one from Norfolk. Ash before feast, health before rest, says another from the Rhineland. Simple lines, yet they reveal a worldview. Hygiene as rhythm, not exception. In church writings, cleanliness took on spiritual gravity. Priests preached that filth of the body mirrored filth of the soul. Washing became penance. Pilgrims on long journeys washed their feet at holy wells, believing that physical cleansing opened the path to forgiveness. The garderobe and the font, one humble, one sacred, were twin instruments in a theology of renewal. In every corner of Europe, the remains tell the same tale, humanity learning to balance necessity with grace. The walls of a 13th century tower in Wales still bear the outline of a wooden seat. In Denmark, an entire latrine block was found perfectly preserved in frozen soil, complete with rushes used for wiping. Each discovery widens the quiet portrait of the past, practical, inventive, deeply human. Even the superstitions that clung to these spaces revealed tenderness rather than fear. People left small coins or beads in pits, offerings to household spirits they hoped would guard the family from illness. Some carved crosses into the stone lintel above the seat. Others hung herbs, sage for purification, lavender for calm, and rue for protection. The smell of these herbs mingled with the ammonia until both scents became inseparable. The pungent fragrance of endurance. Today, restoration teams often find those traces when they rebuild ruined keeps. A tiny hole bored through stone for ventilation, a groove where rope once hung to hold a curtain, soot from a candle stub blackening the upper arch. Each is a fingerprint of ordinary care, the kind that rarely earns a name in chronicles but shapes the feel of a life. Modern visitors laugh softly when guides explain these details, yet they linger, taking photographs, intrigued by how intimate these old structures are. They realize, perhaps unconsciously, that the garderobe was the most human room of all, a place stripped of pretense, where everyone, high or low, remembered what it meant to be flesh and water. Night descends again over the ruins. The archaeologists pack their tools, their lamps flickering out one by one. The air cools. The scent of wet earth rises. From somewhere down the valley comes the faint rush of a river, carrying the day's rainfall toward the sea. The sound is ancient and new at once. The same water that once flowed through monastic drains now moves beneath motor bridges and electric light. The continuum is unbroken, and in that constancy lies comfort. What the medieval world built in stone, we continue in pipe and porcelain. The forms change, the gratitude remains. Every time we turn a tap or flush away what we no longer need, we repeat an old prayer in mechanical form. Keep it moving, keep it clean, keep life flowing. The garderobe, humble and silent, taught that first lesson. Dawn creeps in quietly over the city. The light touches rooftops, chimney pots, satellite dishes, the new towers of another age. Beneath them, the ground hums with hidden rivers, storm drains, sewers, water mains, each carrying its endless cargo. The sound is faint, but steady, a reminder that the ancient pulse still beats below. People step from their doors into the clean morning, never thinking of the centuries of work that make such freshness possible. A shower running in an upstairs flat is the direct descendant of a wooden seat in a castle wall. The hiss of a modern flush is the same rhythm that echoed through garderobe chutes into dark moats long ago. The architecture of sanitation is the unseen spine of civilization, unchanged in purpose if altered in form. Archaeologists sometimes stand in the middle of modern excavation sites and smile quietly to themselves. In the new tunnels, the air smells like wet clay, metal, and time, not unlike the scent of the old pits they have studied. They see continuity where others see progress. The great underground works of today, lit with halogen lamps and measured by laser, are vast poems written in the same language as their medieval ancestors. Gravity, flow, and faith in motion under cathedrals and civic squares. Ancient drains still lie buried. Some are mapped, some forgotten. A few still run, repurposed by accident into the modern network. The water that passes through them may carry dust from centuries of footsteps of monks, soldiers, children, and kings, all mingled in the same invisible current. The past moves beneath our feet like groundwater, unseen but nourishing. In certain museums, curators display cross sections of medieval garderobes beside models of modern plumbing. Visitors marvel at the similarity. The slope, the vent, and the discharge were all conceived by hands that never knew electricity or glass. What we call invention is often only remembrance given new material. The old masons understood water as a living partner, not an obstacle. They built with respect, and their structures, even in ruin, still function when rain falls. Language, too, has carried the echo forward. The words loo, lavatory, privy, and restroom each descend from older courtesies meant to soften the unsoftenable. Every age invents euphemisms because every age understands that modesty is part of civilization. To speak gently of necessity is to acknowledge it without shame. It is an art as old as architecture. In rural parts of Europe, old garderobes have been turned into alcoves, closets, or garden shelves. Some still carry the faint chill of their first purpose. A few have become shrines to curiosity, decorated with candles and herbs, as if to honor the space that once bore the most human of burdens. Even in transformation, the shape endures, narrow, vertical, discreet, a relic of respect for what must pass unseen. Folklore continues to hold its quiet guardianship. Farmers still drop lime in their compost heaps, echoing the medieval belief in purification through ash. Children in some villages are told to never throw bread into toilets, an old superstition born from the sacredness of food and the fear of waste. Customs become kindness when their origins are forgotten. They are our heritage, written not in books, but in gestures. Modern engineers speak of sanitary architecture, but behind their precision lies the same reverence that monks once held for flowing water. They design networks that breathe, that move in cycles. Each valve, each vent, each slope is a whisper of the same prayer. Let it pass, let it cleanse, let it return. The discipline may have changed its name, but its purpose remains devotional. In the quiet hours of the night, when a city sleeps and rain begins to fall, that prayer hums again. The sound of rain striking rooftops becomes the sound of drains below, one continuous hymn of motion. The water travels downward, washing streets, cooling stone, finding its way through metal and brick, through ancient channels now fused to modern pipes. It rushes beneath museums and marketplaces, past the basements of apartment buildings, past the remnants of forgotten garderobes embedded in foundation walls. The journey ends in rivers and seas that have carried humanity's story since before it learned to build. Each drop carries memory, not guilt, not filth, just memory of how people learned to care for what leaves them behind. In this sense, sanitation is not just survival, it is storytelling. Every flush, every drain, every cleaned floor repeats the tale of those who first believed that dignity belonged even to waste. Archaeologists sometimes describe their work as listening. They do not only dig, they tune their senses to the hum of what remains. When they find a garderobe shaft, they treat it with quiet reverence, brushing dust from its edges as if waking a sleeping thought. They know that within those stones lies evidence of trust, trust that water would carry trouble away, that the world itself would help shoulder the burden. When they climb out of the trenches and stand among the ruins, they can almost hear it, the faint echo of dripping water, a sound both humble and eternal. The same sound that once soothed castle walls to sleep. The same sound that murmurs under cities tonight. The garderobe's legacy, then, is not one of embarrassment, but of triumph. It is proof that people, across time, have found ways to make peace with what they could not avoid. It teaches that civilization is not built by glory but by grace, the grace of those who clean, who maintain, who keep the flow moving. When others look away, every civilization leaves behind its monuments. Most crumble, most are forgotten, but the drains remain. Beneath every church, every palace, every modern street, they continue their patient work. They do not seek attention. They do not need praise. They are the heartbeat of human humility, pulsing steadily through centuries of noise. So when you hear the hush of running water in your sink, or the soft exhale of a toilet tank refilling, pause for a moment. Listen closely. Beneath that sound is 1,000 years of learning, of quiet care, of people shaping comfort out of stone and patience. Beneath that sound is history, alive and murmuring. It whispers that cleanliness was never simply about purity. It was about the connection between earth and body, between servant and master, between what we take in and what we release. It reminds us that nothing truly leaves. It only changes place, joining the endless circle that carries all living things forward. The garderobe was never just a hole in a wall. It was the first conversation between humanity and its own fragility, a promise that life could be dignified even in its most ordinary acts. And so, the whisper continues, through pipes and rivers, through memory and invention, through every act of care that keeps the world bearable. Tonight, the story rests not with kings or builders, but with the flow itself, still moving, still teaching, still forgiving. The water carries our past, our persistence, and our peace. It carries us all. Chapter 6. The Legacy Beneath Us. What medieval toilets still teach the living? The night is quiet. Rain has passed, leaving the air cool and clear, and the scent of earth rises like a kind memory. Somewhere far below, unseen, the drains hum softly, an old rhythm still at work. The sound is so constant that most ears no longer notice it. Yet it is the same pulse that moved through the garderobes of castles and monasteries centuries ago. Civilization hums in that low music of water, finding its way home. In the silence between drops, the mind travels backward. You can almost see the stone towers in their youth, walls raw and gray, the flicker of torches behind slit windows, the smell of lime and rushes. You can imagine the mason at work, his hammer echoing down corridors, shaping the narrow chute that would carry life's waste into the moat below. He doesn't think of grandeur. He thinks of function. He knows that every fortress, no matter how proud, must still breathe. In that knowledge lies wisdom deeper than pride. The people of the Middle Ages, for all their superstition and hardship, understood something the modern world often forgets: that comfort must be maintained, and that maintenance is an act of love. Their toilets, humble, crude, ingenious, were the beating heart of that understanding. When you stand inside a ruined garderobe today, you can feel that truth in your skin. The air is cooler there, the stones still damp. Light filters through the narrow slit where wind once entered. There's a hush in the place, not shame, not disgust, but humility. Here, kings and servants shared the same condition. Here, the body told the truth that titles tried to disguise. Medieval people did not hide from that truth. They worked with it. They dug pits, lined them with clay, sprinkled ash and herbs, and invented systems that suited their climate and their conscience. The garderobe was never just a necessity. It was an interface between human and world, between need and nature. The poorest peasants, with no castle wall to shelter them, still learned to dig carefully. They knew where water flowed, where soil drained, and which herbs to burn to cleanse the air. They understood that filth ignored would turn against them. To keep clean was to stay alive. That same lesson travels through time, invisible as air. It passes through the monastic drains of Cluny and Westminster, through the cesspits of York and Lubeck, through the aqueducts reborn in Paris, and into the polished pipes of today. What began as survival became ritual, and ritual became civilization. Our world, with its running taps and bright tiles, feels far removed from those dark stone chambers. Yet every gleaming bathroom carries within it the ghost of a medieval engineer, a mason, a servant with a broom. Every gleam of porcelain holds a trace of lime dust, a fragment of that ancient patience. The true legacy of the garderobe is not technical, but moral. It whispers a truth about human equality, about care, about the work no one sees, but everyone depends upon. Imagine for a moment the castle without its drains. The banquet hall filled with perfume and song would soon turn sour. The moat would fester, the air would thicken, and disease would remind even the proudest lord of his mortality. Civilization survives, not because of power, but because of maintenance. The world is kept livable by those who tend what others ignore. That is the oldest lesson, carried through the centuries by water and by will. Cleanliness is not vanity, but gratitude. In the still corners of ruined abbeys, that gratitude is carved into stone. You can find small channels that carried rain from the roof to the garden, troughs shaped to catch the overflow, and tiny vents cut to let air move through sleeping quarters. Each design speaks the same language, an understanding that life depends on flow, and that water care is soul care. As the centuries turned, people forgot to see the poetry in that simplicity. The garderobe became a curiosity, the work of sanitation, a subject for laughter. Yet even now, when we speak of purification or renewal, we echo the same old metaphors: cleansing, washing away, and beginning anew. These are not just figures of speech. They are the bones of a worldview that learned from water. In the modern city, we live above rivers of our own making, pipes, sewers, conduits, yet we seldom think of them as sacred. But they are. They carry away what we cannot keep, allowing us to start again each day. Without them, comfort collapses. Without them, the illusion of progress fades. In this way, the medieval garderobe still speaks. It tells us that civilization's strength is not in its towers, but in its drains. Not in what it shows, but in what it sustains. When the archaeologist brushes away centuries of soil and finds the mouth of an old latrine, she is uncovering more than architecture. She is finding evidence of a value system, one that saw no shame in the mechanics of survival. It is a quiet reminder that dignity begins in honesty. If we listen, we can still hear that honesty humming through our cities tonight. It flows beneath the pavement, through metal veins and brick hearts. It rises as steam from vents, murmurs in bathroom walls, echoes in the sigh of a faucet closing. It is the voice of history itself, saying softly, "Keep things moving. keep them clean, and remember those who make that possible. The Middle Ages knew that comfort without gratitude decays quickly. Their garderobes were humble temples to that truth. The mason carved them, the servant cleaned them, the Lord used them, and together, without knowing, they wrote the blueprint of the modern world. In the hush before sleep, that lesson feels close again. The drip of rain outside, the steady rhythm of your own breath, are both parts of the same continuity. Flow, patience, cleansing, rest. The world turns quietly on those motions, and as the night deepens, and water keeps whispering through the unseen channels of the city, we begin to understand that the history of toilets is not merely about hygiene or design, but about empathy, the steady work of caring for what must be let go. The rain returns before dawn, tapping gently on slate roofs. The world outside your window smells faintly of wet iron and cold air, the same scent that once drifted through castle corridors after storms. Somewhere below, drains carry the sound of the weather, echoing softly through the underworld of pipes. You might not notice it at first, but that quiet rush is the language of civilization continuing in its sleep. If the Middle Ages taught us anything, it is that endurance is quieter than glory. The garderobe, humble and plain, was a teacher of patience long before books spoke of it. It stood in every fortress, every monastery, every home that could afford a wall strong enough to hold its weight. It demanded regular care, gentle attention, and trust in the unseen. To ignore it was to invite sickness. To tend it was to preserve peace. When archaeologists unearth those chambers today, they often remark on their precision. The angle of each chute, the placement of vents, and the thickness of mortar all reveal a mind attentive to detail. The mason who carved a garderobe was not simply digging a hole, he was shaping comfort out of gravity. The success of his work was measured not by admiration, but by the absence if no one noticed the smell. He had done well. It is an art form without vanity, and therefore pure. In a way, the garderobe is a metaphor for all unseen labor, the tasks done in silence so that others may rest. Servants, masons, gong farmers, and later plumbers, their names fade, but their legacy remains under every stone and street. Civilization depends on its discretion. They are the quiet architects of trust. When we think of medieval life, we picture banners and battles, monks with quills, peasants in fields. Yet the true heartbeat of that world lay in smaller rhythms. The drawing of water, the sweeping of floors, the emptying of pits. Each act of maintenance was a form of devotion, a vow to continuity, and that continuity became the thread that carried humanity forward. In monasteries, the act of cleansing was woven into prayer. Water symbolized both physical and spiritual renewal. When a monk washed his hands before copying scripture, he was not only removing dust, but preparing his soul to receive clarity. In the same spirit, to keep the latrine clean was to protect the community's peace, to turn care into ritual. That idea never truly vanished. It survives in our habits, quiet and subconscious. The morning shower, the evening cleaning of dishes, and the flushing away of the day's remnants are all secular prayers of renewal. We may not speak the words, but we perform the gesture. We let go and begin again. The garderobe also carried a lesson in humility. No matter how high one's birth, the body spoke the same truth to all. The king and the scullery boy shared the same need. the same vulnerability. In that moment, every difference dissolved. It was perhaps the most democratic space of the medieval world, a small stone seat where all pretensions paused. To modern eyes, that may seem trivial, yet for a society steeped in hierarchy, such equality was quietly radical. It reminded even the powerful that comfort was temporary and that maintenance was eternal. Power could not escape decay, it could only manage it with grace. That balance between pride and patience is still our hidden teacher. We build towers of glass and steel now, yet beneath them run the same systems of waste and water. No progress erases the need to care for what leaves us. When engineers design cities, they often speak of flow management. The term sounds cold, but it is the direct heir of the medieval mason's art. To guide what moves downward is to understand both nature and consequence. Every pipe is a channel of responsibility. The philosophy extends beyond architecture. In life, too, what we ignore tends to rise again. The medieval pit that was left uncleaned would overflow. In our world, unattended neglect takes other forms: pollution, inequality, and moral decay. The lesson is the same. Maintenance is mercy. It is the act that keeps rot from spreading. This is why the history of toilets is more than curiosity. It is a parable. It shows how people learned to turn necessity into wisdom, how they built dignity from the raw material of survival. To trace that evolution is to trace the slow awakening of empathy, the recognition that one's comfort depends on the care of others. The garderobe's architecture embodied that empathy. Its builders thought not only of themselves, but of those who would come after. They carved drains with slopes gentle enough to resist erosion, lined walls with lime to ease cleaning, and placed vents for air to move. These were acts of foresight, of compassion for the future. When we speak of progress, we often mean speed or brilliance, but the garderobe reminds us that the truest progress is persistent systems that endure, simple and reliable, quietly serving generations. Even its language speaks of gentleness. Privy, meaning private, suggests discretion. Necessary room implies respect. House of ease offers kindness. The names alone show a wish to treat the unavoidable with softness. Humanity, for all its pride, sought tenderness even here. Today, as cities grow and technology advances, the same desire remains. We invent better systems, cleaner methods, but the principle is unchanged. Remove waste with dignity, preserve health through humility, and trust water to carry our forgiveness away. In many ways, this understanding connects us more closely to the Middle Ages than we realize. For all our sophistication, we still depend on the same balance of earth, air, and water. We still rely on unseen labor. We still speak quietly of purification when we mean peace. If the old monks could see our world, its shining bathrooms, its endless pipes, its invisible cleanliness, they would perhaps nod in recognition, not because it is perfect, but because it continues their work. The flow has never stopped. It has only found new paths, and in the quietest hours of the night, when you hear the faint sound of water somewhere in the walls, remember this: it is the same lullaby that soothed the stone castles centuries ago. The sound of life in motion, the comfort of continuity, the hum of care. The Middle Ages did not end with a single sunrise. They faded slowly into the light of new centuries, and with them, the garderobes changed shape, but not soul. Their stones crumbled into courtyards, their channels filled with silt, Yet the idea of them, their purpose, their patience, passed quietly into the age that followed. In the 15th and 16th centuries, castles began to breathe differently. Architects spoke no longer of defense, but of comfort. Where once the garderobe had hung like a small tower against the wall, newer designs tucked it discreetly inside chambers. Closer to warmth and privacy, the sense of shame had grown, but so had the sense of refinement. The same human now asked for grace. Builders in England began to design multiple privies within larger residences, each with stone seats and lead pipes that carried waste down to moats or streams. The engineering was rudimentary, but deliberate. Small openings cut high in the walls let air move. The first whisper of what would later become ventilation. Beneath, pits were lined with lime, cleaned by servants who worked at night, their labor as invisible as breath. In France, the Chateau of the Loire experimented with luxury. Some garderobes were fitted with benches of oak, polished smooth, others lined with glazed tiles that reflected candlelight. Nobles perfumed the air with herbs, not to deceive, but to soothe. The smell of lavender, rosemary, or crushed juniper mingled with stone, a scent that spoke both of wealth and weariness. Across Europe, the rhythm of cleanliness was shifting. What had once been communal became private. What had once been accepted became concealed. The medieval mind, which saw sanitation as practical and shared, slowly gave way to the Renaissance sense of individuality. Yet the foundation remained, the principle of flow, the architecture of mercy. In monasteries, the reredoors endured. Even as the Reformation scattered monks and stripped cloisters bare, their drains kept running. Archaeologists still find them intact channels of stone, perfectly aligned, water still finding its path centuries later. In that endurance, the Middle Ages outlived its own theology. In the towns, cesspits deepened as populations grew. The smell of prosperity came with a cost. As trade flourished, so did waste. The medieval systems strained under the weight of progress. Records from London, Bruges, and Florence speak of inspectors walking the streets, ordering householders to empty their pits for the health of the air. It was an echo of the old monastic discipline, cleanliness not for vanity, but for survival. Those who did the emptying were still the night workers, the gong farmers and scavengers. Their profession passed from father to son like a burdened inheritance. They moved through alleys with lanterns and shovels, scraping centuries into carts. They were paid in silver and silence. Their work made cities livable, though no one wished to see their faces. Even as the Renaissance filled Europe with light and art, the garderobe's shadow persisted. Beneath frescoed ceilings and painted chapels, the old needs remained. Engineers adapted medieval methods into new forms. Enclosed pits lined with brick, wooden sluices leading to rivers, and early mechanical pumps that lifted water to upper floors. These were not revolutions, but refinements of the medieval heart beating beneath a different skin. In palaces, privacy became fashionable. Servants carried portable close stools fitted with ceramic bowls. These, too, were born from the medieval model. Wooden boxes lined with wax, emptied by hand. The difference was mobility. Luxury learned from necessity. Monarchs sat upon gilded versions of what peasants still dug in fields. The lineage was unbroken. The Islamic world, centuries ahead in hydraulic engineering, influenced Europe through trade and conquest. From Moorish Spain came the idea of running water as a blessing, not a burden. The courtyards of Al-Andalus carried small channels where water flowed constantly, symbolizing purity. Travelers brought these ideas north, merging them with Christian thought. The medieval European toilet, once purely functional, began to borrow grace. In monasteries and castles alike, builders learned to harness that idea. They shaped chutes that curved for smoother flow, covered pits to keep air moving cleanly. Some even lined drains with glazed ceramic tiles, a small miracle of hygiene hidden beneath the floor. When excavated today, those tiles still gleam faintly, their glaze resistant to time, their surfaces smooth from centuries of water. As cities grew denser, the tension between the past and progress deepened. Old garages collapsed into the foundations of new buildings. In London, beneath Tudor and Georgian houses, archaeologists still find medieval shafts intact, filled and sealed when newer systems rose above them. Within those layers lie remnants of both faith and filth, broken rosaries beside oyster shells, bits of mirror glass, forgotten keys. Each object tells a story of someone who lived between worlds, medieval in habit, modern in hope. It was not until the 17th century that Europe began to rediscover what its ancestors had already known, that waste and water must move together. Plague and foul air returned, and with them, fear. Physicians spoke of miasma, of corruption rising from the ground. They recommended what the medieval masons had always practiced: lime, air, flow. In this way, the wisdom of the Middle Ages resurfaced like an old stone after rain. The garderobe had never been a primitive contraption. It had been an early expression of ecological sense. It knew what nature required and what humanity owed. The Enlightenment brought theory, but not always humility. Engineers now spoke of efficiency, of the conquest of nature, yet their blueprints still followed medieval lines. Gravity-fed pipes, vented shafts, and access doors for cleaning. What science renamed the Middle Ages had already tested in patience. Even the language endured. Privy remained the word for centuries, from the Latin privatus, meaning personal, withdrawn, quiet. It carried the memory of secrecy, but also of dignity. In medieval ledgers, the term meant not shame, but solitude. The garderobe had always been a place apart, a small sanctuary from noise and duty. In that way, it anticipated modern privacy itself. The act of cleanliness, too, began to change meaning. In the medieval world, it was a social responsibility. In the modern one, it became personal. Yet one could not exist without the other. The city's health still depended on collective discipline, the same cooperation that kept castle drains clear and monastic pipes flowing. Civilization remained a shared ritual of care. In time, the garderobe disappeared as a word, but not as a spirit. Its principle that waste must be handled with respect and removed with grace remained buried beneath every modern invention. The flush toilet, when it arrived in the 17th century, was less a revolution than a translation. It spoke in porcelain what the medieval mason had whispered in stone. If you listen in certain ruins after a storm, you can still hear it. The faint drip through the shaft, the echo of moving water. It is not just sound, it is memory. Each drop carries centuries of adaptation. Every improvement, another verse in the same long song. From the castle wall to the modern home, the lesson endures cleanliness as compassion, function as faith, and humility as the quiet measure of progress. The garderobe's spirit is not gone. It simply lives where it always has, beneath us, doing its work unseen, patient as the flow that built the world. Night has returned to the city. Streetlights shimmer on puddles left by the evening rain. Every rooftop glistens, every gutter sighs. Beneath it all, the old rhythm continues, a low murmur of water, finding its way through stone, brick, and steel. No one listens, yet it never stops speaking. That hum is older than any empire. It began the first time someone cut a groove in rock and let a bucket of waste slide away with the rain. From that simple gesture, part need, part reverence, came everything that makes comfort possible. If you close your eyes, the centuries fold together. The sound of a drain in your wall becomes the echo of a garderobe chute in a Norman keep. The faint metallic scent of plumbing becomes the damp breath of lime-washed stone. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes form, traveling forward like water that cannot help but flow. The garderobe taught this continuity better than any sermon. It showed that all things move in cycles. What leaves us feeds the earth. What the earth cleans returns. The people of the Middle Ages did not need microscopes to know this. They saw it in the fields, in rivers, in the way smell softened after rain. Their toilets were crude by our measure, yet wise in purpose, always returning what was taken, never breaking the loop. Archaeologists say that medieval sanitation was the first quiet contract between humanity and nature. Every pit lined with clay was a promise not to poison the ground that gave grain. Every bucket of ash sprinkled in a chute was a thank you to the air for bearing what must pass. Each act, however small, joined survival with gratitude. The Enlightenment may have given that knowledge new words, but not greater truth. The modern sewer, the porcelain bowl, the chemical cleanser, they are refinements, not revolutions. They are the garderobe reborn in a different light. The same humility endures beneath the shine. When the great cities of the 19th century finally built vast underground networks, they did so with the same devotion that masons once carved into castle walls. Engineers spoke of load and pressure, but their drawings still curved like the medieval chutes, always downward, always toward release. And above, life flourished. Theaters, schools, bakeries, gardens. Every blossom in a window box owed its fragrance to the unseen mercy below. If one could walk through those tunnels today, one might still feel the presence of older hands, the rhythm of the pick, the echo of a monk's prayer for flowing water, the laugh of a laborer who worked by torchlight. Time does not erase such sounds. It buries them until we listen closely enough. Cleanliness, once a communal duty, has become so constant that we mistake it for nature itself. We forget that behind every clear drop of water lies 1,000 years of trial, failure, and devotion. Yet forgetting does not diminish gratitude. It only waits to be remembered. And when we pause, even for a moment, to hear a drain whisper or a faucet sigh, memory returns like a tide. The legacy of the medieval toilet is not confined to stone relics or museum labels. It lives in our daily gestures, the turning of a tap, the rinsing of hands, the quiet relief that follows. Each act repeats the same lesson that dignity begins with care, and care begins with those who keep the world clean. There is a holiness in that work still. Sanitation workers, engineers, cleaners, plumbers, they are today's monks of motion. Their tools hum, where chance once rose. They too guard the health of the living through patience and unseen labor. Their lineage runs straight back to the nameless hands that once scraped lime into castle pits before dawn. Civilization rests on such hands. They build, they wash, they mend, they never boast. When cities speak of progress, it is their silence that allows the boasting. And though few statues are raised for them, every warm bath, every safe drink of water, every breath of clean air is their monument. The garderobe, then, was not a symbol of filth, but of faith that human ingenuity could turn necessity into mercy. To carve a hole in a wall and trust gravity to carry away what one could not bear was to participate in creation's rhythm. It was the first plumbing of hope. Somewhere tonight, far from castles or cities, a single stream winds through grass. The moon trembles on its surface. The water is clear, but in its depths lies a memory of the trace of ash, the shadow of lime, the echo of countless acts of cleaning and release. It flows toward the sea, carrying everything gently, never judging and never keeping score. That is how history itself moves. We build, we use, we let go, and the flow continues. The garderobe reminds us that letting go is not loss, but renewal. Without it, the world would drown in its own holding. So tonight, before sleep, listen once more to the hush behind your walls. Hear how the water slides through pipes, how air shifts in vents, how every system hums in quiet harmony. That sound is civilization breathing. That sound is 1,000 years of human care still alive in motion. The story of medieval toilets ends not with ruin, but with gratitude. Gratitude for those who built without glory. Gratitude for those who clean so others can dream. Gratitude for the lesson that purity and humility are the same path, winding downward, always finding the sea. And when the night falls quiet and the last lamp fades, the world below keeps moving, patient, faithful, forgiving. Water remembers, stone endures, and life always begins again. And so the night falls quiet, carrying their whispers into silence. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another whisper in the night. Until we meet again, good night.